Today's video lecture is a continuation in our development unit. We are focusing today on language and how it is developed.
So some of the things we're going to be talking about today are the difference between phonemes and morphemes, syntax versus semantics, the stages of language that we go through, and the debate that we see in the field of psychology between kind of the Watson-Skinner behavioral perspective and a man named Noam Chomsky. So first look in, this should hopefully be a review for you from your English class, but the difference between phonemes and morphemes. Phonemes are the smallest parts of language. So if you look at the word bat, B-A-T, each of those letters are a different phoneme. So it's the smallest part of the language. Or if we look at the word chat, ch-at, has three different phonemes. C-H is one, and then A and T. So the smallest parts of language are phonemes. Morphemes, on the other hand, are the smallest parts of language, or the smallest pieces of language that carry meaning. So if you look at the word unkindness, we have three different morphemes in there. Un has a meaning, kind has a meaning, and ness has a meaning. And so each of those three parts carry meaning. Putting those together help us to understand the meaning of that whole word. That's why sometimes when you're doing SAT practice, they tell you for the reading portion to look for, if you're looking at a vocabulary term that you don't know, look at the prefix or the suffix. See if you can find a portion of that word that you do know to try and draw a connection of the meaning of the entirety of that word. When we look at grammar, there is semantics and syntax when we're drawing conclusions about grammar. Semantics is what part of the word gives it meaning. For example, when you add an ed to different words, it indicates that that word or that thing happened in the past. So when I would say it rained, that means that it rained in the past. Versus something like an ing, which means it's currently happening right now. So it is raining. That indicates that ing indicates that it's happening right now. So those endings to those base words indicate the meaning in that word. There's also syntax, which is grammar structure, about what way do we put the order of words when we are writing. So in English, we would say Jane ate a cake. We wouldn't say a cake Jane ate, because that's not proper syntax. That's not proper structure of words in our English language. When you look at other languages, sometimes they have different rules of syntax, different rules of structure, where like in Spanish, you would say like house white, instead of in English where you would say the house is white. So each language has its own syntax or structure or rules of structure with regards to their language. So when developmental psychologists look at children, particularly focusing on those early years, they look at how is language developed in these children. How do they progress from being non-speaking when they're born to very fluently speaking by the time they're 4 or 5 years old. They're speaking more like 5 or 6, but they're speaking obviously more fluently than they did at birth. And so they've broken it down into different stages of language that we go through, starting in about 3 to 4 months where you hit that babbling stage where you hear babies say coo, or babies might say mum, 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 or they might just put a bunch of strings of letters together and they don't make any sense at all. That's babbling. Then when they hit about 1 to 2 years old, they turn into the one word stage where they begin to repeat one word, such as mom, mom, or dad, or this. That's happening in the one word stage. Then when they hit about 2 years, we're seeing if they can string 2 words together. So like love mom or hot dog. We're able to see those 2 words together. And we also at that same time we see some what's called telegraphic speech that's occurring, where it's almost like children are speaking as if they're a telegram. So you see in the bottom right corner it says, yeah mom, I want to speak. So rather than that child saying, yes mom, I would like to speak to you, that child has shortened it almost like you would if you were sending somebody a telegram, and that's how they speak. Everything is spoken as if it's a telegram, this shortened version of what it is that they're wanting to say. We also find that overgeneralization, or it's also called overregularization, occurs in speaking. Children might say, "Buddy hitted me," where they are using those rules that they learned of semantics, and they are overgeneralizing them and using them to words that shouldn't have them. So we know that when we say hit in the past tense, we say Buddy hit me, or Buddy did hit me, not hitted to indicate the past. So sometimes we find that children use overgeneralization or overregularization and use those ed or those ing endings on words that they shouldn't use those for. So we can see in the top left corner, it kind of shows you that progression that happens, more of like a slope progression rather than a stage or a step stool progression. So we go from the cooing and babbling to the one word to the two word, and that telegraphic speech happens kind of together in that line. So where does this matter in psychology besides being able to identify and look at this language development in children? Where is kind of the argument that happens in psych? And that's with regards to where language comes from. How are we able to learn language? Is language learned through our nature? We are born with the biology to be able to speak? Or is it a product of nurture or environment, and because we're exposed to that language, we are able to speak? And so there's kind of two different sides of the coin. Watson and Skinner, we know, are from the behavioral perspective. They believe that language is a direct reflection of reinforcement and modeling. So it's because you have heard people speak that you are able to speak. It's because you've been reinforced where your parents say good job or smile or get excited when you make noise. That's the reason why you're able to speak. So they are solely on the nurture side of the spectrum. In contrast, we have somebody like Noam Chomsky, who believes that it's a little bit of a combination of both, but really lies more on the nature side. And he believes that we are born with what's called this language acquisition, that we are born with the ability to learn language. And that comes pre-programmed in our brain. And it's through exposure to language that those pre-programs are able to connect and we are able to speak. So when we think back to the previous video lecture where we showed those synaptic connections that occur throughout the years, the more children are learning, the more those synaptic connections occur. Chomsky believes that we have these neurons and these connections available to learn language, every single language, not just English, but every language. And it's through exposure and practice with that we are able to reinforce those connections, and those language connections don't get kind of pruned off or cut off. And so Chomsky believed that there's kind of a critical age. There's a critical period that if a child is not exposed to language, they will never be able to learn language. That's not necessarily just words, but being able to learn language, being able to learn the semantics and the syntax in sentences, and to be able to properly put together an English sentence or paragraph. So this critical period hypothesis really indicates that nature really sets us up to be able to understand language, but unless we are exposed to that language to kind of use those already inborn connections, those things are going to be pruned and cut off, and we're not going to be able to learn that language that we were born to be able to learn. That's it for today.